the development of our continent.
50 years after most nations in Africa regained their independence, is creeping and crawling. If we do an objective analysis, survey, or a content analysis, either qualitative or quantitative, the result will shock you that the continent witnessed more infrastructural development in the times of the colonial masters than in the time when our own are ruling their different countries. When we regained our independence across the African continent, there was celebration. We had celebration across the street from Accra, right to Nairobi, moved down to Lagos, come to Yaoundé, we moved down to Lomé, Jamina, Niamey, also Dar es Salaam. You can name the rest. It was a moment where Africans were celebrating that their resources will now be used to make their countries and their continent to be an El Dorado. It was also a moment where Africans were hoping that the nation and their respective territories will become a place where most Europeans will want to come and take citizenship. It was also a moment when Africans were celebrating the fact that the aspect of poor treatment of Africans, the aspect of non-accountability of Africans, the aspect in which Africans were subjected to forced labor will be an issue of the past. We celebrated when the Union Jack came down in most of our African countries. And that is why Osagyefun Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of independent Ghana, in 1957 said, the independence of Ghana would be meaningless unless it is linked with the total emancipation for its different African states. And in Tanzania, the president at the time also said that it would be good for Africans to come together and see how they can develop their country. Haile Selassie of Ethiopia was not left out in this, in which he also decried the nature of European colonization and partition for Africa. And he said that there is time for us to look at Africa not as the boundaries drawn by the people who sat in Berlin, but also should be looked as people who share a common culture and values. However, 50 years after we regained this independence across most of our African continent, most of our countries in Africa, the balance sheet is clear. We are still talking about the issue of poor roads network. But our leaders traveled. They go to Beijing, Moscow, New York, Hong Kong, UK, and they take beautiful pictures with good network, good railway system, good traffic, and they post these beautiful pictures on their official government handle. And when they come back to our continent, we are shuttled between bad roads. In fact, bad roads have killed many more people in our African continent, including Cameroon, than gun will do that. When our African leaders also traveled, they go for good medical attention with good hospitals, well-class hospitals. In fact, they do selfie in these hospitals. But when we look at our own hospitals in Africa, this same continent that they defend huge sums of budget at their respective parliament, whether it is in Kenya, whether it is in Sudan, whether it is in Nigeria, whether it is in Ivory Coast or Senegal, they defend huge sums of budget, but the budget end up in the pockets of selected few. In fact, the constitution of our African states and most African nations ought to be the supreme document that protects our nation. When you go to the Western nation, you will hear somebody will tell you, do you know I can call police for you? I will sue you. But in Africa, to know where things doesn't work, the adage will be, do you know who I am? To connect qui je suis in some French country. To tell you that it is no longer the law. Because if it is the law, it will not be, do you know who I am? It will be, I can sue you. But because we are ruled by law and not of law, we are fortunate or unfortunate to have justice. To those who are strong are fortunate to have justice. Now, let us also look at the economy. Our economy is creeping and crawling in most of our African nations. 50 years after we regain our independence, where are the human and natural resources? I want to keep away the natural resources because it will be a polemic for a different day. The human capacity. There are nations that don't have these resources, but they are doing well. They are almost moving to first-class nation. Singapore is an example. Malaysia is an example. These are nations. Japan is an example. These are nations. But the question now we should be asking ourselves within the African country is, since when did we start gratifying thieves? Since when did we start gratifying people based on our cultural background? Today, you just need to have birth certificate or fraud your certificate, and you will be applauded and be voted president in one of our countries in Africa. Today, you just need to come from a very popular ethnic group, and you'll be voted, irrespective of your track record or capacity. We don't longer look at track record or capacity. We don't longer look at what you can do. We now look at who you are and what you can offer on the table for us to eat. Today, we gratify those who embezzle huge sums of money, and we call them our thieves. In civilized countries, in countries that things work, when people are appointed by the president, they are not celebrated by their families. But in our country, we write motion of support in our continent and thank the head of state for appointing one of our own who will give us our own national cake. But should it be that system? And so we are asking the question on House of Commons today. What are the 5 neglected sectors in Cameroon that we should work on in order to enhance our country and make our country to become a better place? Just yesterday, the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, granted an interview on France 24 on Russian television. He said, and I quote, "I want my country to become an El Dorado. The things that young men go out to look for, I want that in the next 10 years, they will come and look for it in Burkina Faso. Because Burkina Faso is the heart of Africa. And when the heart is doing well, the rest of the body will do well." This is House of Commons with me, Tamai Jarvis.